Dustin had always known he was different. Growing up, he felt like an actor on a stage, playing a role he never quite rehearsed but was expected to perfect. Dustin wasn't an unhappy child, but there was always something off, as though he were wearing shoes that didn't quite fit. But in a world that valued conformity, he had to be the dutiful son, the good friend, the average kid who went unnoticed. That was until high school, when his world took a turn he never saw coming. It started innocently enough. Dustin would spend hours in his sister Amelia's room when no one was home, mesmerized by the collection of dresses, makeup, and jewelry spread across her vanity. It was an unspoken rule in their house that the bedroom was a private space, a sanctuary, but when the house was quiet, Dustin would sneak in. He'd run his hands over the fabrics, feel the softness of her lip glosses, and smell the sweet, floral scent of her perfume. It wasn't about wanting to be her. It was about exploring a side of himself that felt right, natural, yet forbidden. The first time he tried on one of her dresses, it was a disaster. The fabric hung awkwardly, and his reflection was a comical mismatch of adolescent insecurity and the trappings of femininity. But even as he looked at his reflection, part of him smiled. It wasn't about perfection. It was about feeling a glimmer of something he couldn't quite name yet. A spark, a hint of freedom, a sense that this part of him, this elusive side, had been waiting all along, just out of reach. Over the years, his excursions into Amelia's room became less frequent, but more purposeful. He learned to experiment with different outfits, tried his hand at makeup, and even picked up tips from online tutorials. He created a persona for himself, someone who could exist only in the safety of an empty house and in front of a mirror. In those moments, he wasn't Dustin. He was Justine. The name came to him one evening, a name that felt foreign and familiar, a name that felt right. College brought new freedom and new fears. Dustin moved out of his childhood home and into a dorm, sharing a small space with a roommate who knew nothing about his secret. College was supposed to be the time to find oneself, to explore, but Dustin found himself even more confined. He buried Justine, fearing judgment and rejection. But every time he saw a confident woman on campus, her laughter ringing out or her style catching his eye, he felt a pang of longing. It was as though Justine was whispering to him, reminding him that she was still there, waiting. One Friday evening, when his roommate was away for the weekend, Dustin sat alone in his room, staring at a shopping cart full of makeup, clothes, and accessories on his laptop screen. He had been debating for days, agonizing over whether he should buy them. His heart raced, his palms sweaty as he hovered over the checkout button. The fear was overwhelming, but so was the need. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and clicked confirm. When the package arrived, Dustin felt a mixture of exhilaration and dread. He waited until nightfall, when the dorm was quiet, and locked himself in his room. Piece by piece, he transformed. Each item he put on felt like a small piece of armor, building up Justine from the inside out. When he looked in the mirror, he saw more than a boy in makeup and a dress. He saw Justine, clear as day, smiling back at him. And in that moment, he felt alive in a way he never had before. Dustin knew he couldn't live in the shadows forever. The thought of people knowing about Justine was terrifying, but the idea of hiding her for the rest of his life felt worse. He had to take a step, even if it was a small one. He confided in Amelia, the one person he hoped might understand. They hadn't been close since childhood, but when he told her, the words tumbling out in a rush of nerves and hope, she listened quietly. When he finished, she took his hand, smiled softly, and said, "I think Justine sounds beautiful." With Amelia's support, Dustin began the slow process of coming to terms with who he was. He started attending a support group for people exploring gender identity, where he met others with similar stories. He learned about the journeys of others who had walked a path like his, and he realized he wasn't alone. For the first time, he allowed himself to envision a future not as Dustin, but as Justine, no longer hiding, no longer pretending. During one meeting, he met Jessica. Jessica was a transgender woman who had transitioned years ago and had a confidence that radiated like sunlight. She was unapologetically herself, and Dustin was captivated. They started meeting outside of group sessions, and Jessica became a mentor, guiding him through the complexities of self-acceptance, identity, and transition. Jessica taught him that this journey wasn't about erasing Dustin, it was about embracing Justine. He could be whole, complete, and live in a way that honored both parts of himself. Months passed, and Dustin slowly started going out as Justine. It was terrifying at first, the stares, the whispers, the constant feeling of being scrutinized. But with each outing, she felt stronger. She learned to hold her head high, to walk with confidence, and to trust that she had every right to exist as she was. Justine wasn't perfect, and neither was her journey, but it was hers, and that made it beautiful. Eventually, Dustin decided it was time for a permanent change. He chose a new name, a name that felt like a fusion of Justine and Jessica, a name that symbolized his journey and his growth. He became Jessica, a name that held both strength and softness, a name that felt like home. Jessica's journey wasn't without challenges. She faced rejection, confusion, and loss. Friends drifted away, family members struggled to understand, and strangers stared with a mix of curiosity and judgment. But she also found acceptance, love, and community. She met people who saw her for who she was and embraced her with open arms. She built a life that was true to herself, a life she could be proud of. Looking back, Jessica realized that Dustin had been a necessary part of her journey. Dustin had carried the weight of her secret, had kept Justine safe when the world felt too dangerous, and had given her the strength to finally become Jessica. In a way, she hadn't left Dustin behind. She had carried him with her, allowing him to be a part of her story, even as she stepped into a future where she could finally, fully, be herself. Jessica knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she also knew she had come too far to turn back. She had fought too hard, loved too deeply, and grown too much to ever go back to the shadows. This was her life, her truth, and she was ready to live it with her whole heart. Jessica's journey was only beginning. The decision to live authentically was powerful, but it was far from the end of her struggles. As she began to make changes publicly, she had to confront each of her fears head-on, and every step brought a new wave of challenges, triumphs, and self-discovery. In those early days, the small, everyday experiences held the most weight. Jessica remembered the first time she walked into a department store intending to buy herself an outfit. It was a task that sounded simple enough, but she'd been paralyzed at the thought of it for days. Standing in the women's section, her heart raced as she looked over the racks of clothing, nervously glancing at the people around her. She half expected someone to approach her, to tell her she didn't belong. But no one did. A sales associate approached with a friendly smile, asked if she needed any help, and treated her with the same politeness and professionalism as anyone else. Jessica let herself relax just a bit, reassured by the kindness. As she paid for her items and walked out of the store, her shopping bag swinging at her side, she felt a surge of pride. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it was hers. Each experience like this fortified her courage and taught her that she didn't have to hide. The world might not always be welcoming, but there was room in it for her. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Jessica sat down and began writing a journal. She found that documenting her journey, her thoughts, fears, and moments of joy was therapeutic. It became a ritual, one that allowed her to process the highs and lows. She wrote about her first outing as Jessica, the thrill and terror mingling in her heart, and about the day she told her family one by one her truth. When Jessica finally worked up the courage to share her truth with her parents, she felt an unfamiliar sense of liberation, mixed with overwhelming anxiety. She told them not as a plea for acceptance, but as a declaration of who she was. To her relief, her parents, while taken aback, were supportive. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was a meaningful one. Her mother, through tears, told Jessica that while she was sad to say goodbye to Dustin, she could see how much this change meant. Her father, normally reserved, had nodded solemnly and said, "All we want is for you to be happy." The acceptance from her parents gave Jessica strength, but it didn't always shield her from the pain of rejection from others. Some of her friendships changed or faded altogether. A few of her closest friends had distanced themselves, unable or unwilling to accept her transition. It hurt deeply, and she mourned those losses, but she also grew resilient. Jessica came to understand that while the support of others was invaluable, her own acceptance of herself was what mattered most. In the following months, Jessica continued her transformation. She began hormone replacement therapy, something she'd dreamed about but never thought she'd have the courage to pursue. She remembered her first visit to the doctor's office, sitting in the waiting room with a mix of excitement and nerves, barely able to keep her hands from trembling. The process was slow, the changes gradual, but with each passing day, she felt her body aligning more and more with her true self. Her skin softened, her features subtly shifted, and even her voice changed over time, allowing her to feel more comfortable and confident in her own skin. Jessica's connection with her sister, Amelia, grew stronger as well. Amelia became her confidant, her stylist, and her biggest cheerleader. They spent countless hours together, laughing, experimenting with makeup, and talking about everything from clothes to relationships. Amelia was patient, kind, and always willing to listen. When Jessica felt overwhelmed or lost, Amelia was there to remind her of how far she'd come. They forged a bond that went beyond sisterhood, a friendship built on shared experiences, trust, and love. It was around this time that Jessica decided to share her story online. She'd been following the journeys of other transgender individuals for years, finding strength in their stories, and she felt a need to add her voice to the conversation. With a mix of vulnerability and courage, she started a blog titled From Dustin to Jessica, My Journey. Her first post was raw and heartfelt, detailing her struggles, her fears, and her hopes. She wrote not for validation, but to reach out to others who might feel alone, lost, or misunderstood. The response was overwhelming. Messages began pouring in from people all around the world, expressing support, admiration, and gratitude. Some were from other transgender individuals, sharing their own journeys, while others were from allies offering words of encouragement. Jessica read each message, deeply moved by the connection she felt with people she'd never met. For the first time, she realized the power of her story, how it could resonate with others and inspire change. She continued to write, sharing both the challenges and the triumphs, and over time, her blog became a lifeline, not just for her readers but for herself. Jessica also met someone special through her blog. His name was Alex, a reader who had reached out to thank her for her courage and transparency. They began exchanging messages, bonding over shared interests and a deep respect for one another's journeys. Jessica was hesitant at first, unsure if she was ready for a relationship, but Alex's kindness and understanding won her over. He never questioned her identity or her past. He accepted her wholly as Jessica. Their connection grew slowly, naturally, and with him, Jessica found a love she'd thought was out of reach. As they spent more time together, Alex showed Jessica a world she'd longed for but had never fully believed she could have, a world of acceptance, companionship, and love. He held her hand in public, stood by her side during difficult moments, and reminded her every day of her worth. With Alex, she didn't feel like she was performing or hiding. She felt seen, cherished, and celebrated. Jessica's life, once defined by secrecy and fear, was now filled with authenticity, resilience, and hope. She was finally living as the person she was always meant to be, and while her journey was far from over, she knew she could face whatever came her way. Jessica had learned that her identity was not something to be hidden or suppressed, but something to be embraced, celebrated, and shared with the world. Years later, as Jessica looked back on her life, she realized that every step of her journey, from Dustin to Justine to Jessica, had been necessary. Each chapter, each name, each transformation had been a piece of the puzzle that formed her true self. She had faced her fears, loved deeply, and come to understand the strength that lay within her all along. Jessica's story was one of courage, love, and self-acceptance. It was a journey that had tested her limits, broken her heart and healed her soul. And through it all, she had found herself whole, authentic, and finally, fully alive. Thank you so much for watching till now. It means the world to have you here. This community is all about empowering each other and celebrating the incredible journeys of everyone on their path to living authentically. If you're ever feeling lost or alone, remember you have a whole family here for you. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and let's keep inspiring each other, sending you all the love and strength in the world. Until next time, live your life by your rules.